March 23, 1964, Jacksonville, Florida. Racial tension reaches the boiling point as violence erupts following black protests against segregation. An innocent mother of 10, Johnnie Mae Chappell, will lose her life in this chaotic atmosphere, randomly gunned down from a moving vehicle by 4 hate-filled white youths. All will be arrested and indicted for first-degree murder. None will be convicted of that crime. My name is Keith Beauchamp, and I'm a filmmaker. I grew up in the Deep South where my parents instilled in me the value of speaking up for those who had difficulty being heard. The young, the old, the oppressed, especially those who suffered great injustice. At an early age, I realized my calling in life, a spiritual calling that has led me on a journey to tell the stories of those who lost their lives throughout the Civil Rights era. 45 years have passed since Johnnie Mae Chappell was killed, and her family has yet to see justice served for her cold-blooded murder. People don't usually think of Florida when it comes to racial conflict and unrest in this country. But scratch underneath the surface and you will find the vestiges of racism and Jim Crow in northern Florida, which is very much a part of Old Dixie. Davis, how you doing?
Jacksonville in '64, one of the things they had been promised was that local merchants had said, we'll begin hiring blacks and we'll also begin desegregating our lunch counters. And a lot of those promises were reneged upon. So here come the demonstrations again in February and March. And then here come the mass arrests. March 21st, the mayor, Hayden Burns, comes on TV and radio. And he gives this very incendiary speech where basically he doesn't offer an olive branch to the civil rights leadership in Jacksonville. He throws down the gauntlet. And basically what he says is, if you all want to keep demonstrating, well, we can just keep filling our jails. And so this is the context in which Johnnie Mae Chappell is murdered, where you had local blacks angry at the mayor. You had a lot of whites and KKK just looking for any chance to crack some heads. And that's what you got. And when Johnnie Mae Chappell is murdered on March 23rd, I mean, she's just trying to find her wallet in the road. She didn't have anything to do with the riots. She didn't have anything to do with wanting to integrate lunch counters. She was just trying to put food on the table for her family.
I need to learn more about Johnnie Mae from those who were affected the most by her death, her children, and the detectives who first cracked the homicide case back in 1964. Today, I'll be meeting her children at the memorial service they hold every year on the anniversary of her death at the very same church where their mother's wedding and funeral ceremonies were held years ago.
God is still good. God is still awesome. So we thank God for this gathering today, and we're going to pray right now that the Lord continue to bless this particular event in this particular time.
Grandmas can do anything to make you feel good, no matter how old you are. Could I not have all those options from her? Why couldn't she be here for me, for my sister and my brother?
This is my story, y'all. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. That was my grandma.
After the memorial service, I had the opportunity to learn more about Mrs. Chappell from her children. Ruth, could you please tell me a little bit about your mother?
My fondest memories of my mother was of her really loving her children, taking care of us. Phone rang, and it was my Aunt Di calling. And she told my aunt that Johnnie Mae was murdered. And like my brother said, like all hell broke loose. My aunt ran out the house. I think I passed out. I was 15. Things like that, you lose your mother. You don't have her there to nurture you. to give you comfort, to talk to you about life. Her life was taken from us on a senseless cause. These guys acted on it. They thought about it, and they said, let's go kill. And this is what he said. Let's go kill a nigger. Okay?
There's no words can describe how you can live a life without a mother. All I can say, if you have one, you have the best thing in the world. My family has been destroyed. When I say destroyed, I mean by a regular life. Even now, it's painful to talk about. It's an avenue that you really don't want to go down when you talking about the death, the murder, the senseless murder, how it happened.
Shelton always asks me about his mama, our mama. What was she like, who she was, stuff like that. And I constantly told him things, not knowing what, how he was gonna grow up to be. And I'm quite sure Mom will be real proud of him today.
Shelton Chappell has become his mother's champion over the years, fighting to memorialize her and to get justice for her murder. He was only 4 months old when she was killed and has no direct memories of her. In fact, the only picture he has to remember her by is a photo of her lying dead in the morgue with his bereaved father, Willie, looking down in grief. I'm going to meet him now at the house where his family lived in 1964.
Brother Keith.
Mr. Shelton Chappell.
How you doing, sir?
Doing okay.
Man, good to see you. Good
to see you. It's been a while.
Bless you. Yes, yes. You're standing on the property of my mother and my father and my family when my mother was killed.
Since your mother's passing, how have you and your siblings been able to deal with her murder?
Really, we haven't been able to deal with
the murder that's still, in a sense, unsolved.
Exactly. We haven't been able to deal with it. I was 2 years old when the state took us away from my father. Split the family up completely. Actually, I feel that we paid the price for my mother being killed, put in foster home, juvenile shelter, separate from each other till we was adults.
Everyone's separate?
Everyone's separate. And I mean, actually, we paid the price for that. So we lost our mother, we lost our father, and we lost each other. So you tell me, is that justice?
Shelton told me about an interview he recorded with his father, Willie Chappell, shortly before his death, in which he recalled the last conversation with his wife as she lay dying in the ambulance.
I done lost your mama. The last thing she spoke to me about her baby. I said, don't worry about the baby. I said, I'll take care of the baby. See, now this is what kept me together. By me having children, that kept my mind sort of focused. My children is what kept me together.
Unfortunately, soon after his wife was buried, Shelton's father was deemed incapable of caring for his children, and they were all sent to different foster homes and juvenile facilities. In the years that followed, Mr. Chappell kept in touch with his children who had been scattered across the state. Mr. Chappell died in 1995, having borne the weight of injustice and the breakup of his family for more than 30 years. Now that I know the tragedy that befell Johnnie Mae's family following her death, I need to find out exactly what happened that fateful evening when she was murdered. The evening of March 23, 1964, riots raged in downtown Jacksonville. Things were a lot quieter in the northwest quadrant of town, but violence would soon arrive in the form of a souped-up '63 Plymouth Fury and a loaded .22 caliber pistol. After a long, hard day of cleaning homes in the white section of town, Johnnie Mae Chappell took the bus home and stopped at the local grocery store. Once home, she realized she had lost her wallet and later enlisted 2 neighbors to help search for it. At the same time, 4 young white men, angered by radio reports of the riots flaring downtown, cruised the streets of northwest Jacksonville looking for trouble.
Let's go get us a neighbor. Right there.
After yesterday's sunset, the city's worst day of racial violence, a Negro woman was shot to death as she walked along a street. A white truck driver was...
I need to learn the facts of this case firsthand from the law enforcement officers originally involved in the Chappell case. As the first officer to arrive at the murder scene, Duval County Deputy Sheriff William Plaster will never forget the night Mrs. Chappell lost her life. Officer Plaster, could you please tell me what took place on March 23rd, 1964?
Me and my partner was riding this beat, and we got a call on a shooting at Von Creef in US 1. It was just south of the intersection here where I found her, where that blue truck is. She was on the side of the road. And we came out, we pulled up, and the woman was lying on the ground, and I jumped out and got her and picked her up and called my partner to call an ambulance as quick as he could. And when I picked her up, she said, "Officer, Mr. Policeman, I'm gonna die." And I said, "No, we're gonna get you to the hospital." And she shook her head like that. And the ambulance got there real quick, and we got her to Duval Medical Center, which was there at that time. And they declared her dead right after she got there. That's been 40 years ago, and I'll never forget it. She was just walking alongside the road, not hurting anybody, and they come along and shoot her. Could have been my mother.
Officer Plaster and his partner filed the original homicide report that night, but there was no immediate investigation. 5 months later, 2 detectives from the sheriff's office would crack the case, which had been literally swept under the rug. I'm going to speak with them now at the site of Mrs. Chappell's shooting.
As you know, Keith, Sergeant Coleman and I didn't become involved in the Chappell homicide for months, from March to August, when we broke the case in August. But of course, we've researched it and read about it and done and so more or less we know what happened. The dark colored car came by and slowed and shot Mrs. Chappell with a .22 caliber pistol, and she fell. Immediately after they shot Mrs. Chappell, they went to about a mile up here to Trout River Boulevard and turned left, ran about another mile, and they sold the murder weapon to a gentleman for $25. Of course, we found all this out from them, and we recovered the murder weapon, from that point on.
The first arrest we made was
Wayne Chessman.
Wayne Chessman.
Well, he was the most demonstrative of the bunch.
It was his gun that was used. Then Cato was the driver of the car. And then the one they tried, Rich.
When we got the first confession and admission from Wayne Chessman, our job was to find the case file, see who had been assigned that case, and then contact those 2 detectives and tell them to get down here. We just got an admission on one of your cases, take it over. And then we'd have gone back to work. But we couldn't find a case file. We couldn't find anything.
Everybody could go in the chief's office at night. That's where the keys to the Identification Bureau was. And we were looking and couldn't find it. And as I sit there, just fixing to make a phone call, I looked down at the floor, and underneath the plastic carpet cover that was under his desk was a piece of paper sticking out in the corner. Pulled it up, and bless Pat, it was a road patrol's report of this incident, which was not on file at all. And it had to be put there by Mr. Patrick. There was 25, 30 more papers under there. We should have taken them out and read them all, but we didn't.
On the 12th, we reported the conduct of our chief to the sheriff. And the next morning, Sergeant Coleman and I were brought into his office. The chief slammed the door, and in the most scurrilous language you've ever heard in your life, he said, "You're off the Chappell homicide, don't touch it, get out of here, and don't ever go in that sheriff's office again." Chief Patrick was a very bad and dishonorable man. His son said under oath that Patrick had taken he and his mother to many Ku Klux Klan meetings in St. Johns County.
After being removed from the case, Detectives Cody and Coleman were reassigned. Within a year, they would be fired for insubordination. Detective Cody has been the guiding hand in the search for justice for the Chappell murder. In 1996, he saw an article about the memorial Johnnie Mae's children were holding and decided to attend. At the church, he met and befriended Shelton, who he has been collaborating with in the fight for justice ever since.
After the on-site detectives made the investigation on the night she was murdered, that report, and in Johnnie Mae's case, there should have been crime scene drawings, should have been photographs. None of that was done. You know, she wasn't important. After we received the first confession from one of the murderers, we discovered that there were no records of Mrs. Chappell ever being killed in Duval County, which indicated to us immediately that there was something amiss. We didn't know exactly what it was. And the way we became involved in it, the case was not assigned to us. In fact, the case was never assigned for investigation after the initial on-scene investigation, as it should have been. Sergeant Coleman and I, we stopped at the Frisette, a little restaurant out on the north side of Jacksonville where all the crooks and the cops ate. That's like you see in the movies, right? And all of a sudden, one of the little tough guys was named Wayne Chessman, was sitting by himself. And he walked over to us and he said, "Sergeant, I just wanted to let you know you guys won't have to watch me anymore. I'm not going to do anything else that's bad." He said, "My mother just married a very wealthy man down in South Florida and works for the airlines, and he's going to get me a job." And he said, "So I'm going to be a good boy." And I said, "That's great. Glad to hear that, Wayne."
So Detectives Cody and Coleman had their curiosity piqued by a young hood, Wayne Chessman, who hung out at the Frisette restaurant where they frequently ate. His remarks led them to suspect that he and his friends were involved in the killing of Mrs. Chappell 5 months earlier.
We had been talking to one of the principals in the car, and he broke down and told us the whole story. And then we picked up, we got 3 confessions from him that night.
3 confessions of
the 3 that we picked up, and all of them admitted they were there. Rich said somebody else shot. The other 2 said he did. Now, this was one of the best prima facie cases it's ever been. It was all over with. They confessed. We found the weapon. Now we didn't have the projectile, but the morgue, the fellow at the morgue had it. And with that and the confessions, that was it. There was enough evidence to put all 4 of them not just in jail, but in the electric chair. It was capital murder. They confessed to it.
If this case was so tight, why was there never a murder conviction for the homicide of Johnnie Mae Chappell? Johnnie Mae's killers were arrested and quickly confessed, but justice was never served. Today, Shelton invited me to accompany him on a visit to his mother's grave.
When I come to Jacksonville, I come visit my mother.
I was disheartened to see the rundown condition of the cemetery and surprised that Mrs. Chappell's grave was only marked by a slab bearing the name of her son, Gregory, who died in a motorcycle accident in 1978.
When I wiped the leaves off my mother and brother's slab, it made me think that those the tears that I wiped from the face of my mother. When I walk on this land, I feel that I'm close to her, more so because she really is here. She really is here. She really is here. It means a lot to me to be here. Sometimes I just spend hours just here. No one knows. Just to meditate. But you know, this gives me strength, knowing that we're going to fight on. And we're going to get the justice that's due. We're going to get it. We're going to get it. We're going to get it.
Johnnie Mae Chappell's half-brother, Ollie Hutchinson, is one of the few surviving members of her generation. He is still pained by memories of her violent death.
It just hurt to know that someone that come along and this shooter, this Jolon So. It's a terrible thing for us to go through with. But when I first found out that that happened, it did something to me that I never had this feeling before. And I missed her, because she was my buddy. She kept a smile on her face. She worked hard, and she taking care of kids like she's supposed to. And we just couldn't get justice because, well, this was bad on the blacks. The blacks had a hard way to travel to come through this journey. But I thanks of Johnnie Mae all the time. But we missed her. Thank God.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I just don't know more to say, but help us.
Detective Cody has given me a report which details the corruption within the legal system in Jacksonville in the 1960s. It was written by Shelby Highsmith in 1967 during Florida Governor Claude Kurtz's war on crime. Shelby Highsmith became a federal judge for the District of South Florida in Miami, where he has agreed to meet with me.
Corruption just ran throughout the state of Florida. It was a sort of a way of life almost for some people in law enforcement. Using the Wackenhut investigators, I exposed more corruption of sheriffs throughout Florida to the point where I began to receive threats and whatnot in the mail.
Can you tell us about some of the evidence you uncovered regarding the corruption and the illegal activity in Duval County?
Duval County was much like South Florida at the time. The corruption system was just rampant. I outlined what appeared to be the corruption in the sheriff's office in the letter that I wrote to Wackenhut. There was evidence of widespread illegal activity on the part of the members of the sheriff's road patrol. These activities include payoffs in DWI cases, conversion of county property. In addition, it was indicative that Sheriff Carson may be involved in illegal activities being carried on by other members of his department or has knowledge of same. There are all indications that the rearranged sentences were worked out by the Sheriff's Department and the State Attorney's Office together with the approval of Judge Nelson. It is, in my opinion, absolutely essential that a special prosecutor be appointed.
When we speak of Duval County during that time, would you say that the corruption was going on way before you even started your investigation?
No question about it. It had just germinated, if you will. It had just infected almost the entire department.
Well, it seems likely that the rampant corruption within the Jacksonville legal system was instrumental in preventing justice from ever being served. I'll need to take some time to study some key documents that Detective Cody gave me to get a better understanding of the twists and turns of this very complex case. Mrs. Chappell was killed the night of the Jacksonville riots, March 23, 1964. Detectives Cody and Comey cracked this covered-up case 5 months later in August. They quickly extracted confessions from Wayne Chessman, Elmer Cato, and J.W. Rich. Chessman and Cato fingered Rich as the gunman, and Rich eventually confessed that he had pointed the gun at a group of black people and it went off accidentally. As they all stated that someone in the car had said, "Let's get a nigger," they had inadvertently implicated themselves in a case of premeditated murder. They all pleaded guilty and mentioned that a fourth man, James Davis, was also in the car. He had since rejoined the military and was later arrested. Detectives Cody and Comey retrieved the alleged murder weapon which belonged to Chessman and had changed hands a number of times since the night of the murder. On September 25th, against all odds in this racist environment, a grand jury returned an indictment for first-degree murder for all 4 of the suspects. 1 week later, the men changed their initial guilty pleas to not guilty and trial dates were set. On November 30th, the trial of J.W. Rich commenced. As the poorest and least connected of the bunch, he could not afford an attorney, so the state appointed a public defender. The prosecution was led by State Attorney William Hollis III, who strangely called very few witnesses to testify. None of the other 3 suspects who had fingered Rich as the gunman testified. The responding officer, William Plaster, was never called. The only witness called to testify from the sheriff's office was Detective Coleman, even though he had been removed from the case by his chief, J.C. Patrick. His testimony was strictly limited to the confession he obtained from J.W. Rich. The only evidence presented was 1 bullet in a plain white envelope. There was no weapon.
We went to the property room to get the murder weapon that we booked, and Mr. Howard said, "My records indicate it's here, but it's not, it's gone." So we went straight to the state attorney and said, "The murder weapon's missing."
From what I've learned from Detective Cody, justice never had a chance. How could anyone hope to gain a conviction for first-degree murder without sufficient evidence and incriminating testimony from eyewitnesses? In fact, the jury did convict Rich for the reduced charge of manslaughter on December 2nd after only a 2-day trial. Even this charge would have been difficult to support with the case the prosecution presented. On January 4th, 1965, Rich was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in the state penitentiary. He would only serve 3 years before being paroled. The greatest affront to justice was yet to come. 2 weeks later, it'll be a long, hard road to obtain justice in this case after all these years. I'd love to do something. It'll be a long, hard road to obtain justice in this case after all these years. I'd love to do something. It'll be a long, hard road to obtain justice in this case after all these years. I'd love to do something more immediate to help ease the family's pain. As a first step, I'm going to call the local high school to arrange for a community clean.
A nigger, meaning any black that they saw. They weren't picketing, but anyone that was alive during that time, from me, I consider as part of the civil rights movement. Because during the time she was killed, the men who killed her said, "Let's get a nigger," meaning any black that they saw, they wanted to kill her. As we clean up today, and I'm glad you came to do just that, have in mind that this is part of you. I hope you take back a little part in your heart and remember those who paved the way so we would have the opportunity to go to public schools with anybody we want to.
Today marks the first time in many decades the grave of Mrs. Chappell will be marked with a headstone bearing her name. I hope this can bring some consolation to this family that has suffered so much over the years.
It was grace that brought my liberty. I do not know why Jesus came. He came to love me so. He looked beyond all of my faults and saw my needs. I shall forever lift mine eyes to Calvary to view the cross where Jesus died for me.
This morning, I'm meeting Florida State Senator Tony Hill, one of the Chappell family's strongest allies in their fight for justice. What would be justice?
Well, I think what would be justice is to bring those perpetrators, the ones who committed the crime, to justice and let them be judged by their peers. In other words, for the grand jury to call an investigation, which was done back at the time that this horrific incident happened. But for whatever reason, they never were brought to trial. So I think they need to be brought to trial. There needs to be a grand jury summons and that the evidence be put forth and then ask for a prosecutor to go ahead and ask for murder convictions against these guys. Because they are continuing to walk around here scot-free like nothing happened. Whereas, there's no time limit, no statutory limits on someone being murdered.
Senator Hill has introduced a bill to the Florida State Senate which seeks to compensate the Chappell family for any wrongful acts or omissions by the state of Florida. All four of the alleged perpetrators of this crime are alive and residing in Florida. I'm off to northwest Jacksonville where two of the men live. Wayne Chessman has a checkered past marked with arrests for a number of crimes including murder and armed robbery. His house is on this stretch of road, but we were advised to steer clear of him. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement interviewed his ex-wife and stepdaughter in 2005. Both stated that Chessman had boasted of killing a Negro during the riots. J.W. Rich, who was convicted of manslaughter in the Chappell case, has also been in and out of the legal system for a number of petty crimes. He continues to claim his innocence in interviews, stating emphatically that he had nothing to do with Mrs. Chappell's death.
Hello, Mr. Rich.
I'll go see if he's at the local bar.
Yeah, I'm shooting.
Get away from there with the camera.
Hold on. Mr. Rich.
Hey, wait.
I just want to give you an opportunity to tell your story. I just want to give you an opportunity to tell your story. Mr. Rich. I just want to give you an opportunity to talk.
Hey, Kyle, please.
Sir, could you tell me your side of the story, sir? I just want to give him an opportunity to talk, man.
No, he doesn't want to.
Everybody doesn't know his side of the story. I just want to know the truth surrounding that.
Of the four men indicted for murder in this case, only Rich was brought to trial where he was convicted of the reduced charge of manslaughter. Because of the double jeopardy clause in the Constitution, he could not be prosecuted again for the murder unless it could be proven that his original trial was a sham. The other three suspects could be tried for murder as it carries no statute of limitations and the initial dropping of charges in no way bars future prosecution. I'd like to get a better legal understanding of this case as it stands today. Attorney Bob Sporer has been representing the Chappell family since 2005. Attorney Sporer, could you give me a brief summary of the legal proceedings in this case?
The governor of Florida appointed a special prosecutor who concluded that he could not bring a state criminal prosecution against the men involved in this crime for the reason that they had been indicted in 1964. Those indictments were dismissed, and the criminal procedure rule requiring a speedy trial would prohibit him from bringing a new charge against the three men who had not been brought to trial. The case then goes to the federal prosecutors, where it is under review by the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and that remains an open investigation in my understanding. There is no statute of limitations on murder, so a state criminal prosecution could conceivably be brought at a later date. The federal charges may also be brought regardless of the timing of the events. A civil case was brought by the family's prior attorney, and the court in that case ruled that the statute of limitations barred a civil claim for money damages against the perpetrators of this crime. And that was decided by the Federal Court of Appeals in 2003. So then we look finally to the legislative arena to see whether or not the state legislature in Florida will enact a special claims bill to make restitution to this family that suffered as a result of this murder in 1964 and the lack of due process in terms of corruption within the sheriff's office at that time.
Is there really a chance of moving forward and possibly getting a prosecution?
Yes, there is a very good chance. Although the special prosecutor has determined that the state of Florida at this time would not prosecute, that may change depending on other prosecutors looking at the case again. Additionally, the case is currently under review by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice, and it's entirely possible that a federal prosecution could be brought. We know that in Alabama and Mississippi and in other states that there have been successful prosecutions of murders 30 and 40 and 45 years old. In this case, evidence still exists. There's physical evidence, there's testimonial evidence, there are witnesses available to testify. So yes, I remain optimistic that ultimately justice will be served and that there will be a case brought against these men.
At the moment, it seems the only way the Chappell family will see this case reopened will be through the workings of the federal government. I'm flying up to Washington, D.C. to learn what would be necessary for the FBI to get involved. To get a better understanding of FBI's potential involvement in these cases, today I'm meeting with Civil Rights Unit Chief Carlton Peoples. How is jurisdiction actually determined with these specific cold cases that the FBI is currently dealing with?
For us to get involved in this case, there would have to be some form of federal nexus, whether it's crossing state lines, whether it's occurring on federal property. But with that, any cases that occurred before 1968, the act itself would have to be an act punishable by death. The most direct route to solving these matters will be witnesses, people with knowledge of these incidents, whether it's family members coming forth to talk to us about it. And for us, there are some stereotypes that were built by that generation because law enforcement participated in a lot of these incidents either directly or indirectly. So if we can break down that stereotype and talk with individuals that have access to these cases, I think that would help. But our ultimate goal is to bring closure in some form or fashion to the families affected.
The FBI has reopened a number of cold cases from the civil rights era. A few have even resulted in murder convictions. The murders of Medgar Evers and of the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi, and the 16th Street church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama. Many would like to see this case reopened. The actions of Shelton and Lee Cody inspired the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama to rededicate their civil rights memorial in honor of Johnnie Mae Chappell in 2005. There she symbolizes the forgotten, the many unknown citizens murdered by hate-filled, ignorant racists who have never received justice. I'm heading back to Jacksonville for a gathering of friends and family celebrating the life of Mrs. Johnnie Mae Chappell. Now that her grave has been properly marked with a headstone, Shelton has arranged a dedication ceremony in honor of his mother. I hope this event can bring solace to this family that has endured so much heartache.
God, we may not have had the opportunity years ago, but we thank you for today. God, we understand that yesterday has passed. But God, we honor you for today.
Yes, Lord.
Thank you for those that you're using, God.
Thank you, Jesus.
To remember our Aunt Johnnie Mae. Thank you, God.
Thank you.
Thank you, God.
Thank you.
Thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
Yes, God. We pray that you bless the children.
And I thank all of you who came out today for this special moment to reflect on someone who lost their life to ignorance that quick. So my heart goes out to the family, the friends, and the community who was also affected by this murder.
Today, my mother will be at rest. But justice is not served. We're getting close to closure, but justice have not been served.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For we know the morning will come.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Justice will be done.
Yes.
So we rejoice because morning will come.
Yes.
And we praise you and lift you up now.
Yes.
And we already claiming the victory.
Yes.
Because it's in Jesus' name we claim it.
Yes.
Family say amen.
Amen.
Thank God.
Thank God.
Yes, Lord.